Greetings and hello, fellow Trekkies. Welcome back to another episode of Yelling About Star Trek. My name is Christian Fox, and this is a show where I yell at you about all things Star Trek for your amusement, so I'm not yelling at my friends and family who don't want to hear my thoughts and theories on this fantastic franchise. Today, I want to do another ranking, and specifically, I'm going to be ranking the first officers in the series. Now, before I get started, there's actually a couple things I want to say. One, I'm going to be ranking the characters based on their competence and how much I like them. So a character might be especially competent, but I might not like them as much, so I'm not going to rank them as high. And two, my rankings are going to be divisive. And I think there's going to be one that's definitely going to rub fans the wrong way. So just be aware of that. But of course, I'm happy to chat about that if you do want to have a discussion. And with that out of the way, get out of your space pajamas, put on your shiniest pair of boots, get a cup of coffee, get a cup of tea, maybe some iced tea if you want to pull the Archer maneuver, and brace for impact, because things are about to get nerdy. And also probably a little bit divisive. Now, this ranking, to be perfectly honest, was very difficult because there was one spot, the number 3 spot to be precise, where I was like, okay, there's actually 3 characters here who are really great, and I don't know where to put them because they all belong in the 3 spot. You know, ranking the lower ones is always the easiest, so that's where I'm going to start because all rankings start at the bottom. So in the number 9 position as my least favorite first officer is Michael Burnham. Now, to be honest, I think Michael Burnham is a bad character. I don't think I'm in love with her. I haven't really enjoyed a whole lot that she's done, but I do think she is actually a fairly good captain and much better in the captain role than in the first officer role. Now, of course, the biggest knock against Michael Burnham when it comes to being a first officer is that she mutinied against her captain and nerve pinched her and started a war with the Klingons, which I understand why she did it because she truly believed that they had to fire first in order to get the message across. But still, she went behind her captain's back and actually quite literally went behind her back, pinched her, knocked her out, and then took over the ship and started a war. So that was not great. And I feel like, yes, she has been able to redeem herself, but her time as first officer, I feel like she's constantly challenging the captain much more so than you should be as a first officer, and constantly having to learn the lesson of, hey, as a first officer, you're allowed to question your captain, point out the alternatives, but you got to follow the orders once the orders are final. So you really have to do that. And I felt like she kept having to learn that lesson. So I've been a little bit frustrated by her character. And again, she's not my favorite character. And when she's on screen, I don't dislike it, but I'm never excited when she's on. And in fact, you know what? Maybe I do dislike it a little bit, where it's like, okay, we're in another Michael Burnham scene, and I appreciate that she's emotional and that they really are dealing with emotions on Discovery, which is great, but it's so much, and it's like so many monologues from Michael Burnham, where it's like, I love Grey's Anatomy, but Grey's Anatomy has way too much of that. The monologue thing from Grey's Anatomy is now seeping into Trek, which is a whole other conversation, but I don't know. I'm not loving the character, and so she definitely ranks as my lowest first officer. And in the number 8 spot, a little bit better than Michael Burnham, but not fantastic, is Ransom from Lower Decks. Now, I actually quite enjoy Ransom. The reason he ranks so low is because he's not given a lot to do. Same reason I put Dr. Tiana as the lowest doctor, because she doesn't get a lot to do because they're secondary characters. They're not meant to be the main stars of the show, not in the same way that their counterparts in other shows are meant to be the star. But I actually do really enjoy Ransom because I think he's hysterical. And I love that he's basically a Will Riker parody and that he's doing Riker things in a parodish kind of way. I can't think of the word. But, you know, he's making fun of Riker. And it's a really nice homage to the dashing, charming Riker. And, you know, turning it on its heels. I'm going to stick with that. And kind of make him look a little bit goofy. So I really do enjoy Ransom. I love the Riker pose that he does, and I think he's a lot of fun on the show. He just doesn't rank higher because, well, he's really a secondary character and doesn't get a whole lot to do. And I should say before before you get upset with me, I understand secondary characters can be great, because look at DS9, where literally the best characters on the show were the secondary characters. But that is a discussion, as usual, for another time. Number 7. Now, number 7 hurts. It hurts a lot because I really wanted to put this person above number 7, but I can't. And this is Una from Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And it pains me to do this because I've been going on for weeks now about how good Strange New Worlds is and how it really is truly messing up my rankings, and every character is now gunning for the top spot of their counterparts. Like Captain Pike, he is so good that it's like, whoa, he's coming after you, Picard. He's coming after you, Janeway. But Una, unfortunately, is not, because they just haven't given her a lot to do. And it's disappointing because Strange New Worlds excels with everyone except for her. But I still want to give the character mad props. For one, I think the actor is fantastic, and Rebecca Moraine, I think it's Moraine, does such an amazing job of her. She makes her funny, sympathetic, thoughtful, but also still in charge. So I think she's doing a great job as that character. And I think Una herself is super competent and definitely like the best of the best in Starfleet. It's just that we don't get to see it much because she's relegated to some dialogue here and there. And then in the most recent episode, she was just on the Enterprise the whole time doing a completely different mission than what everyone else was doing. So that was kind of, it was a little bit frustrating. So I'm hoping that she'll get redeemed in season 2 because I know the writers can do it. We've seen it. They're nailing everybody else, but they're just not doing a good job with Una. So Una, unfortunately, is number 7. In number 6. And in the number 6 spot is Suru. I like Suru a lot. I think he's actually a great first officer. He is probably one of the better characters in Discovery, which, again, it's a whole other discussion, but I actually quite enjoy Suru. I think he has the logic of Spock in the sense that he really does think about things before he does them, and he's able to analyze situations in a very Spock-like way, but he's also very thoughtful and does think about how others are feeling and does a really great job of hyping people up in a way that a first officer should. So when things are going down and things are dire, Suru is right there to lift the spirits and to really help people feel like they are Starfleet. They can do what they need to do. And I know he's actually captain, sort of, because he is technically the rank of captain, but he still serves as the first officer for Burnham in season 4. And I would love to see Suru in command one day. Hopefully we get that soon. But I really think he's a good first officer. And now I don't rank him higher just because I don't want to be biased towards Discovery. But again, I'm ranking everything based on not only competence, but how much I actually enjoy the character. And with Discovery, I just don't enjoy the characters like I enjoy other characters from other Star Trek series. So it's probably a bias against Discovery that I don't have Suru higher than he is. But, he still is a very good first officer, and I would love to see more of him. In fact, I'm going to say it right now. Writers of Strange New Worlds, can you just take a month off, okay, from Strange New Worlds? You've got this. And go over to Discovery, help them out, because I don't know what's going on, but Discovery is missing something. And Strange New Worlds seems to have that thing that Discovery is missing. So, take a month off, take 2 months off, go over to Discovery, write some episodes, and make Suru awesome, because I know you can. But the way he is right now, he is not my favorite first officer. So this, everyone, is where things are going to get really divisive, because remember, there are 9 first officer spots. So number 5 is smack dab in the middle. And in the number 5 spot is first officer Spock. And I know you're probably frothing at the mouth right now listening to me, because Spock is the first officer. He is the classic character. In fact, one might even make the argument, which I will try to make one day in a podcast, that Spock is the most iconic character in all of Star Trek. The one character that anyone in the world knows is from Star Trek and knows that person to be Spock. But as much as I love Spock, and as much as I think he is one of the best characters in Star Trek, and as I said, the most iconic character in Star Trek, he's not my favorite first officer. In fact, I think he's kind of a weak first officer. He's very competent. He's amazing as captain, especially in Star Trek 6, when he is just kicking ass, taking names, solving the problem, figuring out the mystery, and solving the mystery, and just being super wise, but super not hype worthy, but really doing a good job of hyping up the crew. But when he's first officer, especially in the original series, that's when he's mostly first officer, he's not great. The crew doesn't always seem to trust him, and he doesn't tell them what he's actually doing. And there's a lot of times where I feel like he keeps them in the dark. Maybe not always, but I just feel like, the crew doesn't really trust him, and he doesn't invoke the loyalty and courage that Captain Kirk often invokes in the crew. And that is just more so a cultural issue in the sense that a lot of the characters that are obviously mostly human don't really understand Vulcans and don't really know how to deal with the lack of emotion. So as a first officer, I don't think he's as amazing as other ones. The other issue I have with Spock as a first officer is that he very rarely challenges Captain Kirk. And he'll, say, Captain Kirk, this is a bad idea. Or he might say, Captain Kirk, I don't think you should do this thing. And I will also say that whenever he talks to Captain Kirk, he doesn't actually call him Captain Kirk. He just calls him Captain or Jim. But he does challenge him a little bit, but not a whole lot. Not in the same way that McCoy challenges Kirk. He'll be like, Kirk, or Jim rather, you are way out of line. What you're doing is incredibly stupid. Do not do this thing that you're about to do. So I would have loved to have seen that more from Spock. But Spock as a first officer, though, fantastic. Literally saving the day all the time. But overall, as a first officer, not my favorite, and that's why I'm putting him at number 5. And if this is upsetting to you and you are outraged and you're like, what is going on? Then hit me up and we'll talk about it because I want to hear your opinion, but I stand by what I'm saying in that I don't think Spock is the best first officer and he's a solid number 5. But of course, this is still in the top 5 first officers in all of Starfleet probably. So he's still up there, just not my favorite. And in the number 4 spot is first officer Depaul. Now, hang on. I know what you're thinking. Depaul's not that great. Nobody likes Depaul. Enterprise isn't that great, but actually you're wrong on both fronts because Enterprise is awesome and Depaul is also pretty fantastic. Now, Depaul does have a similar problem to Spock in that because she's Vulcan, the humans on Enterprise don't quite trust her, and Enterprise is mostly made of humans. So that's a problem. With Depaul does go through a very clear arc of actually winning the confidence of the crew. So the crew actually feels like, hey, Depaul's got our back and we can trust her. Now, I do find it frustrating that it seems like every episode in the first season is, oh, we can't trust Depaul because she's a Vulcan and she's being awful. And then Depaul's like, actually, I'm doing the right thing. And they're like, oh, okay, you're right. Yeah, we trust you now. And then the next episode, it's like, oh, Depaul's doing something. We can't trust her. And then it's like, oh, actually, we can trust her. My bad. And Trip is guilty of that a lot. And I love Trip, but Trip is guilty of that. So I do find that a bit frustrating. Now, there's so many things I love about Depaul. One of the things I love about Depaul is that she does eventually gain everyone's trust. She really does a good job of showing the crew that, hey, she's there for them. And she really does want to help them be as awesome as they can be. In fact, she even comes up to bat for them a number of times when the Vulcans are like, oh, you humans. And Depaul's actually like, no, these humans are pretty awesome, despite Captain Archer's not so amazing gazelle speech. But beyond that, I love the fact that she really does a great job of fulfilling the part of the role which says, hey, you have to challenge your captain if you think your captain is making a bad decision. And that happens a lot in Enterprise because Archer, even though he means well, does make a lot of really bad decisions. And Depaul is always there to say, hey, Captain, you gotta not do this thing that you want to do because it's wrong. And it's probably going to get us into a lot of trouble, which he's usually right. So I love that Depaul is able to really stand up to Archer and put him in his place when he's doing you Vulcans, we're humans and we're better because we trust our gut. And she's like, you got to trust Vulcan logic. So I really like that she's able to put him in his place when she needs to. But she always does it, for the most part, in a pretty respectful way. She does get a little bit testy, especially in the earlier seasons. But for the most part, she does a good job of saying what she needs to say, saying, hey, you got to step back. You got to not do this thing, but does it in a very respectful and courteous way. And I also love the bond that the two of them have, especially towards the latter half of the series when they're really like, okay, we understand each other. And just as much as Depaul's going to bat for Archer, Archer's going to bat for Depaul. So I love it. And I think she is really a truly outstanding first officer. Still not my favorite of the first officers, but really high up there because I think she does a great job. And, quite honestly, I love her storyline. I love the fact that she is just another example of the alien who's on Star Trek, but then slowly becomes corrupted by humans and starts to develop humanness or humanity in a way where not only is she developing humanity and becoming more human, but it's also causing some tension between her and the other Vulcans who are like, hey, you're becoming a little too human, and we picked up a human accent on you, that kind of thing. But I think it's a really interesting character arc, and so I really do enjoy her when she's on screen, and I don't think the show would be nearly as good without Depaul. So always happy when she's on screen and really love what they did with her, and I think she does a great job of telling the captain what's what when she needs to. And now, folks, we are in the top 3 first officers of all of Star Trek. All of Star Trek. And in the number 3 spot is Major Kira Nerys. I don't know why I'm yelling her name, but she's always yelling, so I'm going to yell her name, sort of. But Kira is fantastic and awesome in so many ways and on so many levels. For one thing, I love the fact that she is a super strong female character in that she's badass and she really holds her own, and she still has, moments of like, hey, I'm a woman, but it's not like a 90s woman in the sense where if you were to read her dialogue without knowing her gender, I don't think you would know she was a woman. I think you would just be like, no, this person is really badass. So I love the fact right off the bat that she is a kick-ass woman without being I'm a woman and I'm a generic woman of the 90s who are just there to be saved and to be emotional and to not actually be a real human woman, in real life. So fantastically written. And I also just love the fact that she's one of the very few characters in Star Trek who is so open about her faith and her spiritual beliefs. Worf is somewhat that way, but not on the same level of Kira, where her faith is everything. Because Star Trek has always kind of shied away from really talking about religion in a thoughtful way. I mean, there's been episodes, but generally speaking, Star Trek has kind of said, religion, you know what? Let's move away from that. But Kira is so religious, and it's a part of who she is, but it's done in such a thoughtful way. And she herself is like, hey, I believe in the prophets because I'm Bajoran, and we all believe in the prophets. And without the prophets and that belief, we would not have survived the occupation. But she doesn't force it on other people. Like, for example, her best friend on the series is Dax, and Dax is not religious. She's a scientist. I shouldn't say that, but I should say Jadzia Dax is a scientist because Curzon Dax was not a scientist. You get my point. But Jadzia is a scientist through and through, doesn't believe in the prophets in the same way that Kira believes in the prophets. She believes that they are wormhole aliens and other dimensional beings, but not actually gods. But the two of them are best friends, and they hang out all the time, and they will chat. And Kira will say things like, hey, if you want to learn about the prophets, come to the temple with me. And, maybe I'll show you all about it. But when Jedzia is like, I'm not really feeling it, she's like, all right, that's cool. That's fine. And I really love that depiction of someone who is very religious but doesn't push it on others. So I think that's a very thoughtful way of portraying religion. And that's not just a unique Kira thing. That's just the way the show was written. So I'm not going to say she's the best first officer because of that. But man, she is so good, and I love that aspect of her. And I also love her ability to really stand up for herself. And she doesn't always challenge Captain Sisko, but when she needs to, she'll let him know. And she'll be like, Sisko, that is a terrible call. you need to stop doing that thing, especially in the first episode where she really calls him out, or rather calls out the Federation. But she does a really good job of that. So I really like the fact that she is able to call out her captain when she needs to. And finally, the way she stands up to the bad guys, specifically the way she stands up to Gul Dukat. Now, Gul Dukat, as a lot of us know, is a pretty awesome villain, but he's a really horrible person, which is why he's a great villain. And there's a scene which I just think is so indicative of Kira and how awesome she is, especially when dealing with Dukat, and that's in the Season 6 arc when the Dominion has taken over Deep Space Nine and Gul Dukat is walking around because he's Gul Dukat in charge of the Deep Space Nine, or rather Terok Nor, which he renames it Terok Nor because that's what he does. And there's a scene where he's in his office and Kira is there giving him a report or something. And then she tries to leave, but then he stops her and is like, Major Kira, we haven't spent any time together. Oh, we've attended various meetings. I don't know, I'm giving him a British accent. He doesn't have a British accent. This is, what I'm doing is not even a British accent, but it's something of an accent. But basically he's like, yeah, we've been to all these meetings and we've done things together, sort of, quote unquote, because we're colleagues. But we actually haven't spent any time together. And he just is like, he has a major thing for Major Kira. That's funny. A major thing for Major Kira. I hope you're all as amused as I am because I'm laughing on the inside and maybe on the outside. So he's been trying to get her, for lack of a better term, this whole time. And that's been one of his things is like, hey, conquer Bajor, become Gul Dukat again, and maybe I'll get Major Kira. And so he's just like, no, we need to spend some time together, and gets all seductive and really quite creepy. And then Kira just pushes him out of the way and tells him to stop being that way, or he says something really clever, but is not intended by him, and then leaves and says, you might want to freshen up your breath. And she leaves. But it's like in that scene, it's like, man, who's really in charge? Is it Gul Dukat who is in charge because you think he is because he's the one calling the shots? The Dominion is working for him after all, sort of. Or is it Kira who's basically like, yeah, I'm not going to be threatened or intimidated or hit on by you. I'm just going to go my merry way. And good luck trying to stop me. And she basically calls him out. So incredible, and really does an amazing job of standing up to adversity. Again, on the adversity theme is her ability to do the duty that she needs to do. So in that season 6 arc, it is really quite interesting because Kira is in a position where she has to work with the Dominion to keep Bajor safe. And she really struggles with that. And it's like, I can't do nothing. And so she does end up starting a little bit of a resistance. But for the most part, she does a good job of really doing her duty and being like, all right, I've got to do the right thing here. And she does this long enough to keep Bajor out of the fighting. And eventually, as I said, she does get the resistance started. And she is able to overthrow the Dominion on the station. But up until that point, when she makes that choice, she does a very good job of just biding her time and making sure that she's doing all the right things so that Cardassia doesn't go, hey, Kira, you messed up. We're going to have to take it out on your people. Sorry about that, but we got to do it. So that never happens because Kira is able to really stay committed to the mission, even when it's really, really hard for her. So Kira, all kinds of props. And the fact that she was a former freedom fighter and fought for her people, but was able to adjust to being an officer in the militia and not being a freedom fighter, but being someone who's part of the government, it's so great. I just think it's so impressive that she was able to do all of that, which is why I think she is definitely my number 3 pick. And in the number 2 spot is probably, I'm going to wager here and say that he's probably no one's favorite first officer, and that is Chakotay. And Chakotay is a character who doesn't get a whole lot to do later in this series. He's kind of just there. But I will say he is my second favorite first officer because he is so incredibly competent. And as you might remember, last year around the fall, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was actually around September, where I did an episode making the argument that Chakotay is actually the best first officer. And I stand by it because I remember I said he was the best first officer, but he wasn't my favorite first officer. And the reason I think he is so good is because he had the most work out of any first officer in the franchise that we've seen up to this point. He was the first officer to Janeway. So he had all the regular first officer duties that a first officer has. challenge the captain when you need, make sure you do crew evaluations, do all of the paperwork that comes with being a first officer. And you've got to make the tough calls when the captain goes out and you're in charge. So he has to do all the usual first officer stuff. But his job was so much more complicated because he was a former Maquis officer. So he basically had to prove to the Starfleet crew that he was going to look out for them and that he wasn't going to be biased towards the Maquis crew because he served with them. And he had to show people like Tom Paris and Tuvok that, hey, even if he didn't love them personally or, maybe had some challenges with them in the past, that he was still going to look out for them and treat them the way that they deserve to be treated and to be treated with respect. And he showed that to all of the Starfleet crew that, hey, I've got your back, even though I'm a Maquis guy, but I'm your first officer first. So he would do all of that. But at the same time, and he was able to show the Maquis crew that, hey, he still had their backs, he didn't betray them, and that he's not going to forget about them and he's not going to treat them badly because they're not Starfleet. But that, hey, he's going to look out for them too, the same way he's going to look out for the Starfleet crew. So that's amazing. And on top of that, he also had to help the Maquis crew integrate with the Starfleet crew and really help them find their way on the ship and really understand what does it mean to be a Starfleet officer on Voyager and help them through the transition. He was able to help people like B'Elanna Torres work through that transition. And he was able to even go out and bat for her and say, hey, this person is amazing. B'Elanna's fantastic. You've got to promote her to chief engineer. And so he was able to look out for her while also at the same time showing Captain Janeway that he was someone who could be trusted and that he was going to be looking out for the Starfleet crew and looking out for the Maquis crew and just doing what needs to be done. So he had a lot of work to do. And I also love the fact that Chakotay really did a great job of calling Janeway out when she wasn't making the right call. And even though I don't always agree with Chakotay, especially in Scorpion, his arguments are still really sound. And I love the fact that he was just like, hey, Janeway, I love you. And I'm pretty sure he loved her because the two of them needed to be a couple by the end of the series, but they weren't, which is outrageous. It's disgusting and it's immoral and it's wrong. But all that being said, the fact that he loved her so much and was still like, hey, what you're doing is wrong, is fulfilling the role of a first officer by pointing out alternatives and really questioning her and challenging Janeway when she needed to be challenged. So I love that. And I also love that in one of Janeway's worst moment when she's like, all right, throw, I think, what was it, Leslie? Yeah, throw Leslie in the cargo bay. Let's lower our shields around the cargo bay and let's have the Equinox aliens get him, and then he'll talk. And which is a horrible thing for Janeway to have done. But then the fact that Chakotay's like, hey, this isn't right, and he actually goes in against her orders and saves the guy, fantastic. It's just like, that's a moment where I think if you're on the fence about Chakotay being good or bad and not being great at first officer, that's when you're like, no, he's an amazing first officer. He just saved a man's life from Janeway, who was totally out of control in that episode. But he saved the guy's life, and I was like, yep, Chakotay, you're awesome. I really appreciate you. I just wish he was given more to do in later seasons, but he wasn't, and that's something that we're all going to have to deal with as a fandom. But you never know. He's likely going to have more of a role in season 2 of Prodigy, and maybe the writers will give him more stuff to do. Who knows? But hey, it can happen. And finally, in the number 1 spot is another divisive pick because I feel like some people love him and some people hate him. And that, my friend, is William T. Riker. And I love Riker, as I'm sure you know by now, because I've done lots of episodes about Riker and I've talked about Riker, and I'll always mention Riker, and I talk about his beard a lot. But man, Riker is a cool guy. And what I love about Riker, and the way I always describe him, is that Riker is what would happen if you were to Tuvix Captain Picard and Captain Kirk. You would get Riker. Because in my opinion, Riker has the charm and the swagger and the smoothness that Captain Kirk had, but he also has a thoughtfulness and the belief in morality and ethics that Captain Picard has. So he's such a great combination in that, yeah, he can be charming and super smooth when he needs to be, when he needs to charm the women in the show because it's the 90s and you can't have a male character not be super suave and charming, which hopefully we're getting out of that, but you can't have that in the 90s, especially on Star Trek. And so I think Riker did a good job of that, but he was also able to be in charge and really feel like, yeah, that's why he meshed so well with Captain Picard, because he understood where Picard was coming from and really believed in the same things that Picard did. And when he had to take command and be eloquent and be Picardy about it, he was able to do it and really feel like, yeah, I can see why he's Picard's first officer, because when Picard's not there, he does a pretty good Picard himself. So I love Riker for that. Now, obviously, there are some issues with Riker. There's the Troy situation, the captain situation, which is also the Troy situation. The fact that he kept turning down commands, which is frustrating because I love the idea of getting promoted. And then this idea that you would turn down a promotion, come on, when captain, at least through the eyes of the viewer, is like the job to have, because the show was always about the captain, sort of. And it gets even worse when you realize that he broke up with Troy because he wanted to further his career and was like, hey, I've got this opening on this other ship, and it's going to mean that I can't see you as much, but if I take this position, I'll be able to further my career. And Troy is super understanding and nice about it. And she's probably thinking, okay, he's going to make captain one day, which is pretty awesome. But then imagine what Troy is like when we're on the Enterprise together. He's first officer, he's this and he's that. And it's like, yeah, his career is taking off, so I don't feel as bad. But he wants to go have dinner with me and wants to ask me if I should take command. And then he's going to turn it down? What are you talking about? You left me for the job. The least you can do is advance far enough to become captain. So stop turning it down. So that's a huge knock against Riker. And it's something that I'm sure a lot of fans hate about him, because it irks me. And then the second thing that I don't like about Riker was his attitude towards Jellicoe. I get it. Jellicoe was a little bit mean. He wasn't as nice as Picard. But man, Riker went way off the rails and was totally out of line in part 2 of Chain of Command. So those knocks against Riker really hurt. But overall, I love Riker and I love watching him. I love his Riker stance and his leaning and the Riker maneuver when he enters a chair, or when he not enters a chair, but when he sits down in a chair. And I love his I'm talking to Data pose, where he's there, he's by the console that Data's at, and he has his leg on the console, and it looks really cool. So I just really enjoy watching Riker. And as I said, I don't just focus on the competency, but I also focus on how much I actually enjoy watching the character. And I think 90% of the time when Riker's on screen, I'm having a good time, and I'm always excited when there's a Riker scene coming up. So those are my picks. Riker's my number one guy, my favorite first officer of the franchise. I think he's amazing. And then sadly, Michael Burnham is my least favorite first officer. So I wish she ranked higher, but it's just the way things are. But what about you? Do you agree with me on my picks? Did I make a valid argument for them? Did I say things that you were like 100% absolutely you want to stand up and cheer as I say it? Or did I say something where you're like, I am mad. I can't believe you said it. I want to go pull a Spock and punch a wall. And if you did feel either of those things, please let me know. I would love to hear from you. And also let me know what you like and what you don't like about the show, because ultimately my goal is to make a podcast that you enjoy listening to. And in the paraphrased words of Captain Kirk, I shall see you out there that-a-way.